You are listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski on WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. We're here every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. talking about children and many avenues and functions by which things happen with children. Today we're speaking with Joseph Chilton Pearce. Joe is publisher, has published 6 books: Magical Child Matures, Evolution's End among them. They've been translated in 40 different languages. He's done presentations in about 2,500 programs on radio and television. He also is a lecturer at colleges and universities from all over to Harvard, Rutgers, the University of New York. He's lectured in Bangkok, Thailand, New Zealand, India, Japan, Italy, all over the world, Germany, for UNICEF, the World Health Organizations. Need I go on, Joe? Good morning.
You didn't need to go that far.
How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm fine.
Good. And Joe, I wanted to talk today, to our audience, and let's give them a little bit of current brain-mind research in relationship to child development. You're an expert in all of that, and what I want to do is bring our audience up to date with how learning and the developmental stages of a child really takes place. And I feel like that's your expertise. So why don't you start us off from the very beginning?
Well, if you start from the very beginning, you get into immediately you have to deal with the fact that the brain has 3 completely different sections. These we've inherited from the 3 major evolutionary periods of life on this earth: the reptilian period, the old mammalian period, and now the appearance of the human being. We find these 3 different brain structures really account for a great deal of the problems we have, and of course account for all of the greatness which is in the human being. These 3 parts of the brain start their formation in embryonic form in the first month of utero. And the reptilian, or the ancient sensory motor brain, forms and begins to function in the first trimester, and the old mammalian brain begins to function in the second trimester, and the new human brain begins to function in the third trimester. In fact, the functioning of these 3 brains in their respective evolutionary order, that gave rise to the realization that gestation, pregnancy was in 3 stages. And we find at birth the unfolding and full development of these 3 neural structures, these 3 different brains in our heads, has to, of just a necessity, follow the same pattern. So, in effect, the earliest period of our little infant, when they're crawling around on the floor and stuffing everything into their mouths and so on, is essentially the human in their ancient reptilian form. They're developing their sensory motor system. Once that's developed enough that all the energy doesn't have to go into it, then there's a shift into the old mammalian structure as well, so that the child is then functioning out of 2 different agendas: the sensory motor development and the emotional relational development, which is programmed into the old mammalian brain. So that's the next period of child development. And once those 2 are functioning well enough that they can support the addition of a 3rd function, then we have the opening of the child's real creative intelligence, and they begin to develop the 3rd brain. Now, this sounds very mechanical. We know that the 3 structures are always operating as an integral unit, but you develop them, you get their functions going and develop those functions in their respective order in which they form in utero. Sensory motor has to come first. You've got to get that child ready to bring in sensations and make a good motor response to them, so they can actually bring in all of their teachings and learnings and exploring the world and so on. And then the emotional relational brain. That's the way by which they discover how to relate to that world they're now beginning to experience. And they determine the quality of that relationship, which we call emotion. And we find that, which goes on till about age 4, is the most critical of all periods of our life. When we're developing our great emotional, relational brain, how we're going to relate both to the world that we're forming and later to our relationships with other people, intelligences, development of our intellect, and all of that then can unfold. So you find that these stages, when we speak of them as being windows of opportunity, they're genetically encoded programs and designed to unfold in their respective order.
What ages are we talking about here?
Well, now the earliest sensory motor period was apparently designed by nature to absorb the energy and attention of the infant for the first year. But somewhere around the end of the first year, they should have that sensory motor system well established enough that they can then start and develop the emotional relational brain. And that's when you find them rearing up on their hind legs, and all of a sudden you've got the terrible twos on your hand, because as this child is going into that second year, they're developing their will and the capacity to relate and to make a qualitative evaluation of that relationship. So if you do something they don't like, boy, they're going to let you know it in a hurry. And if there's something they do like, they're going to go for it, and so on. So this will drives them to move out into their world and relate to it. And that goes on till about age 4. Now, this doesn't mean that the great intellectual creative brain up on top, the human brain, is inactive. It's right there as part of the program, but it's not yet the center of the stage for its own program. It's simply learning about the other programs so that later on it can intellectually and creatively respond to the two lower neural structures and their patterns. Is this making sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. You can keep on going,
okay.
Joe.
So after age 4, we have the first stage of the great human brain, as we speak of it, the neocortex, or the neo-mammalian brain, the new mammalian brain. Up on top begins its function. But it begins its function primarily in what we call the right hemisphere. Now, this sounds very mechanical, but actually the right hemisphere develops in utero before the left. It comes first in evolutionary history because it's closely related to the emotional brain and the sensory motor brain, and it really is the one that kind of keeps everything together. It's what we call our holistic brain. And so around age 4, the child moves into this new program, this new agenda of nature's, which is what we call, Piaget referred to this as the child of the dream. And what the brain, that child learns to do at that period is create internal images from storytelling, listening to adult speech, and so on and so forth, having stories read to them, and playing and acting the stories out, and so on. Learns, and he's been doing this all along, learns to create internal images, and then superimpose these images on the external world, and plays in what we call a modulated world of his own reality. For instance, at this point, he's seen a beautiful boat out here somewhere. Well, he wants to play with a beautiful boat. He doesn't have one, but he picks up a matchbox, and it opens up, and here's what? An open little vessel. Wow! His inner image of the boat is superimposed over the external actual image of a matchbox, and the matchbox becomes, in his modulated world, a beautiful boat, and he will play with it by the hour. Or perhaps it's a truck, or a car, or if it's a little girl, it might be a little bed, or all of these different objects that you can be, because the internal image modulates the external, and they play in their own creation. Now, this is what they want to spend 95% of their time doing is playing in this internal world, projecting on the external world. And if allowed to develop this intelligence fully, they learn that their own internal creations can make a change in their external world. And as the Swedish pediatrics group, one of the smartest group of medical people on earth studying children, point out, the child of imagination is never violent. Never. Why? When faced with an external situation which is apparently hostile or violent or insulting or something like that, they simply resort to their inner world of their own creation and come up with an alternate scenario. And will literally kind of let's pretend their way out of it. They have, in effect, an infinite kind of a possibility within for changing the external. The child without imagination, faced with something in the external world that's threatening or denies them something or in some way thwarts them and is demeaning and derogatory, they have no internal imagery by which they can come up with an alternative. And if that sensory input is damaging to them, they have no choice except to lash out against that kind of sensory input if they can and remove it. This is literally the beginnings of the great violence which we see. So we find that that period of early life, they really started long before age 4. At age 4 is when the high brain takes over that imagery. It starts with the emotional brain and parts of the high brain. There are intermediate stages that I can't go into, too complicated. But at age 4, this becomes the great critical part of that whole period from 4 to 7 is developing the internal world which they can then meet the external world through. Now, this is the foundation of what we call metaphoric, symbolic activity. To see a beautiful princess in a little clothespin that the little girl drapes a rag around, or something like that, to see one object in another is called metaphoric capacity. And that is exactly the capacity that the brain has to have to look at something like the figures 1 and the figure plus and the figure 1 and the figure equal and be able to interpret those symbols or those metaphors into meaning in their brain and be able to say to you, aha, that means 1 plus 1 equals 2, you see. Now, those marks on the paper have no meaning in themselves. They must be translated. And you do that through the very metaphoric, symbolic activity that could see a boat in a matchbox or a rocket ship in a little clothespin, whatever it might be. Does that make sense?
Oh, it certainly does, Joe.
If you think that you're going to get high-level, abstract, intellectual activity out of a child whose early imaginative experience was thwarted and compromised, you're kidding yourself. One of the major reasons for the serious breakdown of literacy in the United States was and is the fact that we have taken out that period of the child's imaginative life. No more storytelling, no more let's pretend, no more long vacant periods of doing nothing in which your child can enter into their inner dream world and then dream of those images being expressed outwardly and playing in a let's pretend world.
Let me take one little second here to let people know who they're listening to, because I'm sure they'll want to know more. You are listening to WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski. We are talking with Joseph Chilton Pearce here, who is author of Magical Child Matures, Evolution's End, 6 published books and translated in 40 different languages, author, lecturer, trainer, you name it. He's been around for a long time talking about child development. Okay, Joe, would you continue going now? We're at age 4.
Well, when the child begins this great experience of the inner image of their own world, which they then begin to superimpose on the external. And that's metaphoric. That's the whole roots of metaphoric symbolic thinking. And denied that, if they don't get that chance of hearing the stories told to them, hearing the fairy tales and all of these things, and seeing those images in their own mind's eye, and then playing those images out in their world. They'll pick up, say, 3 little vitamin bottles, and the big one will be Papa Bear, the middle-sized one Mama Bear, and the little one Baby Bear, and they will play with those objects, speaking out the 3-bear story. Now, this is pure metaphoric symbolic thinking. The big bottle was Papa Bear. Now, does the bottle look like Papa Bear? To that child, it does, because their inner image of Papa Bear is superimposed over the external. And through this kind of metaphoric, the word metaphor means transference. When one image can transfer to the meaning of another image, which is how are you going to look at E equal mc2, the most famous equation in mathematics in the world, in physics, Einstein's equation, E equal mc2. What does it mean? Well, the child with symbolic metaphoric capacity will later be able to understand, E stands for, or is a metaphor for energy, the equality mark, and then M stands for mass of a particle, C stands for the speed of light, the speed of light squared. These marks that stand for other things, you have a neural system that can hold all those meanings in your head and love to play in those worlds as well. The child who did not have the storytelling, who did not have the let's pretend, who did not have the vast, long years of play between 1 and at least age 7, will not have that metaphoric symbolic capacity of mind. Literally, those neural structures won't be in place. So, of course, they're not going to be able to grasp those symbolic structures like alphabets and numbers, and then later on equations and chemistry marks and so on. And they will have a hard time in school. There'll be some of these children that only retain 3 to 5% of the information that they're told during the school year because they simply have no neural structures for handling it. And in America, of course, now, as you realize that television, for instance, furnishes the image with the sound to begin with. You tell a child a story, and they see the imagery in their inner mind's eye. And if you can't remember that as a child, I'm sorry for you. But if that's given to them already on television, there's nothing for the brain to do. It just responds and reacts like to any other kind of sound. And then, too, the television, you see the average American child sees 5,000 to 6,000 hours of television before age 5. And this has taken the part of those great long periods of play preparing for this great metaphoric symbolic activity. So there's your first big damage. Get rid of that thing all the way around. No apologies. The content really has nothing to do with its device itself, as medical research is showing all over the world. The device itself that brings about neural impairment, and we're discovering, there's a recent studies from Germany are just appalling in that respect, the effects of television and overstimulus of this sort to the development of a neural structure, or the growth of a neural brain in the child's head is really impaired from that. But see, the exciting thing is now we understand all this, so we don't have to keep making these errors. We can correct them. We just don't do those things anymore, and we go back to that idea of the child's critical need of play, as well as, of course, being loved and nurtured and given the safe space.
I'm here, Joe. I'm right with you.
All right.
I'm sure you're explaining yourself extraordinarily well by mixing your factual and your research information by a little bit of storytelling. So it's very easy to keep on going with you.
All right. At any rate, we have age 7 now. When something else happens, we move into what Piaget called operational thinking. This is a huge shift. In fact, Piaget, the great Jean Piaget, who was the the biologist who started studying children and ended up to be the world's greatest child psychologist. But Piaget said you could add all of the capacities of the child's mind in the first 6 years up together, and they would never even give you a hint of this marvelous capacity that just opens overnight somewhere between the 6th and 7th year. The great Rudolf Steiner said this is when the milk teeth fall out, and then this new process.
The milk teeth fall out?
The milk teeth, you know, your baby teeth.
Yes.
Between 6 and 7, at that point, this huge change is taking place in the whole body and in the brain system itself. And at that point, the entire new human brain goes into its full function. And at that point, the child can not just superimpose images on the external and play in a modulated reality. They want very much to actually operate on that concrete world out there. They want to make things. They have a passion for making things. They love to do things with their body. Everything should be very concrete and very tangible and very real for them. And they learn during this stage more critically than ever through body movement. The child in the earlier years can get very still for long periods of time. But once this great, huge new brain opens up fully, they come into a different muscular control over their body. They have a different attitude to it. And boy, that's when they want to get out and run like the wind and climb to the top of the highest trees. And the little girls want to skip rope, 5,001, 5,002. All these physical activities they want to do. And at the same time, they want to make things. And they love to sing. They like to do things with their bodies. And they like to take all these different things and put them together and make them come out something else, like making cookies or something like that. So you find this period of, from about 7 to 11 of operating on their concrete world. That's what they're designed to do. Above all, we know now they're not designed to sit in desks. And they're not ready yet for abstract information. They need interaction with the real living concrete world, with their real living body. The great beauty of the Waldorf education, they don't even have desks for that whole period of time. The children are in movement most of the time. I'm going to be giving a talk for the Educational Kinesiology Group in Canada, their international meeting. I spoke with them last year. They're the ones who've really worked out all the details of why and how the body must be in movement for learning during this period. And to force the child into a desk and prevent body movement really seriously impairs the learning process itself. But at any rate, this period of concrete operational thinking, in which the child, really they're coming into mastery over their world. It sounds very dramatic, but that's what's actually happening. Actually, children can do all sorts of strange things with their environment or with the concrete world if they're given a model for that learning. I didn't mention that before, but the model imperative, that is, nature's imperative that any new intelligence that unfolds for development in the child must be given a corresponding model for that in the world out there.
What do you mean by that, Joe?
Well, they have this incredible capacity for language which begins in utero. But in order to initiate the language process, they must hear language. And so in the last trimester of utero, when the new brain, which will be used for speech later on, begins to function, it actually stimulates the body to move every time the mother speaks. And this has been found by the work of Kahneman and Sanders and a whole raft of people to be the sensory motor foundation, built literally into the whole muscular system of the body, of the phonetic system on which language is built. But if the mother isn't a speaking mother, That doesn't happen in that child, and they'll be born into the world without these marvelous muscular responses to language, and will never be able to learn language until they're in a language environment, which means when models for language are given them out there in the world, which brings about a stimulus in them. That stimulus brings about a response in their body, and they then can begin to learn language. Now, what kind of language will they learn? They'll learn exactly the language the model out there in their world gives them. French-speaking mama, French-speaking child. Now, that applies to everything. When their mathematical intelligence unfolds, what do they have to have? A model for that given them out there. Someone who can do that mathematics. And generally all they need is the barest kind of suggestion, and the built-in natural intelligence for mathematics can follow that model if learning goes well, if they have all the appropriate foundations for mathematical learning. Which, by the way, strangely enough, they have found the greatest foundations for mathematics are music and also to spatial activities like in art and so forth and so on. And music as an intelligence unfolds between the 3rd and 4th year of a child's life. At the same time, that great creative inner world begins to form. And so if the child is given a model for their music out, they'll imprint to that.
So it sounds like to me, it sounds like from what you have said that the first 6 years are the most critical in term, and especially in utero, are the most, in utero to the first 6 years of life are the most critical times when a child builds and develops the neurons of the brain, the activities, the behaviors, and then from 7 to 11 they take that information and they begin to build more and more information, physically moving their bodies.
Yeah, they express it out there in the world.
And then
apply it.
For the second half of our program, because we're going to have to take a break and acknowledge our sponsors here, so for the second half of our program, we're going to have you talk about moving from that factual stage to, that 7 to 11 stage to adolescence, and give us some information also as well when you talk to us, Joe, about the latest brain-mind research. And I know we're talking a lot in our culture today because of Littleton about violence in our culture and teenage boys and all that, so you might want to help us with that kind of information for the second half of our program. Make sure you stay tuned, and I'm sure you will. Joe is such a fascinating person, it's hard not to be able to sit and listen to him for long periods of time. I won't tell you how many years I've known him, and there's never a time when never ceases to amaze me. He always tells me something new and interesting and different. But we have a few minutes here. We will be moving to our sponsors. You've been listening to Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski on WAAT Radio, 750 AM on the dial. Our guest today is Joseph Chilton Pearce, author of several books, Magical Child Matures, Evolution's End, translated in 40 different languages, presenter, a trainer all over the country, all over the world, in many different areas. You can hear Children Come First every Tuesday from 10 to 11 a.m. on WAAT Radio. The show is produced by Earth Heart Foundation, a nonprofit organization with offices in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and New Mexico. You can contact us at 570-639-2931. If you'd like any information about Joe or any other person we've had on our program, again, you can call us at 570-639-2931 or email us at prokids@rlc.net. That's prokids, PROKIDS, @rlc.net. Join us again for our second half hour when we'll be talking to Joe about developmental stages and the latest brain-mind research, and we'll be back in a few moments.
Her child in a hostile, competitive, combative, threatening environment, it means that nature in its adaptation is preparing that child to survive in a hostile, competitive, combative world. And that child is born with a reduced, reflective, creative, intellectual brain and an enlarged reflexive, quick survival intelligence, which means that they will be prone toward a hostile, combative, competitive society and will not be adaptable to a highly intellectual, creative one. Now, this is profoundly important. What does it mean? That, first of all, the environment seriously affects even the shape of our brain and the way it forms. Why? This is nature's adaptation. It's Darwinian. If nature sees that we're not going to have to use all this energy to defend ourselves when we're born into this world, what does she do? She builds a bigger creative intellectual brain. She says, now we can go ahead with evolution and explore the great creative realms of thought. But if nature sees, hey, this is a rough world we're going to have to be born into, what does she do? She gives us this sensory motor, survival, quick reflexive hindbrain that we inherited from our ancient ancestors who had to survive a very hostile world. Now, this goes on right around us. So we find that if our mothers are all being subjected to a lot of hostility and violence and abuse when they're carrying their child, they're going to give rise to a child conditioned toward, predisposed toward hostility and abuse and violence. Am I making myself clear?
Well, absolutely.
Do you realize this is probably some of the most explosive research that has been turned out in the latter part of this century? What does it mean? It means that we must start and devote all sorts of money, attention, time, and energy to making sure that our mothers are given a safe, compatible, nurturing, warm, loving environment if we want to produce a nation that isn't at war with itself like ours is. So
we certainly don't do that in this country.
The next thing you find is that the prefrontal lobes are the latest evolutionary addition to our brain. The lower creatures don't have them. They're right behind their forehead, and they undergo a big growth spurt at age 15, long after we thought the brain had formed and was complete, and they aren't complete till age 21. Now, all of the recent research on the prefrontal lobes show that our higher human virtues and instincts come from those prefrontal lobes. The capacity for compassion, love, empathy, understanding, charity, care, and so on, come from these new additions that nature has added to these old animal brains of ours. Now, these prefrontal lobes have to be nurtured and given an appropriate environment if they are to actually be activated. Recently, in Time magazine, they showed magnetic imagery, the new magnetic imaging devices they have.
Yes.
They can photograph the interior of a brain inside a live person's skull. And it showed the prefrontal lobes, which they know are critically involved in human behavior. That the prefrontal lobes of a normal person just brought in off the street, who's never been in jail or anything, the prefrontal lobes are filled out and normal looking. They then made photographs of the prefrontal lobes of killers and people in prison from violence, and the prefrontal lobes are so terribly emaciated, literally full of holes. They're gaping. They're awful looking in comparison with the others. You're looking at an actual neural structure of the brain that is almost completely destroyed. It's hardly there, just wispy parts of it. It looked like a gross Swiss cheese with all the missing parts of it compared to a normal prefrontal lobe. And that is the lobe of brain that can modulate the behaviors of those ancient defensive flight-fight kind of attack modes in our ancient reptilian and mammalian brain. So what does it indicate? if you trace back and do profiles on those people, you find that they were not nurtured as children. They were not loved and given care and nurturing, and that their own mothers, in carrying them, had a harsh, abusive pregnancy. And so what happens? Nature can't go ahead to build these later neural structures that have to do with higher modes of evolution itself. She's got to build the bigger ones back there that are going to try to protect that person.
So literally, children are born then with ability or not abilities to be right from birth.
Well, if their mother has been subjected to a great deal of abuse and hostility, and is in a constant state of anxiety
or stress from work,
yeah, if that happens, she is going to give birth to a child with a reduced forebrain. They're not going to have as much of this neural structure which can modulate the behaviors of the old defensive brains that we have in our heads. So you see, if then they're brought up in an environment where they're not loved and nurtured, what's going to happen? More and more deprivation, lack of actual nurturing of these advanced evolutionary structures that lead us on up to our great saints and that kind of thing. They're not going to have that. That you find at each of the developmental stages, the brain undergoes a growth spurt. At age 1, at birth there's a huge brain growth spurt. At age 1, there's another at age 4, and at age 6 and 7 that we talked about, those critical periods. The brain undergoes a growth spurt each time. Whether that growth spurt will be on behalf of the higher evolutionary brains of compassion and love and so on, or the lower ones of defense against a world that we can't trust, will depend on the nurturing and care of that child during that period. Now, we know this. This is taken out of all emotion or la-di-da psychology. We're talking about hardcore biology. We know this is what happens. So this goes right into Jim Prescott's recent research that showed that an 11-year-old boy brought to any kind of attention of the authorities will cost the taxpayers $475,000 by the time he's 21 years old. Why? Because this shows a breakdown in the very structures of the brain that allows that child to be socialized and to modify their own behavior in order to be compatible with their world out there. So the first thing we have to do, Daria, is to stop all of our moral, ethical talk and start and talk about biology of these children. They're not morally irresponsible. They're damaged biologically.
Wow, that's a different perception.
The biggest single step forward in our whole history. I mean, at this point, we can see that what we've tried to do through religion and philosophy and all those things down through the years has not worked because we were working against our own biology. So the thing isn't to preach to these children, it's to love them right from the beginning. And we do know that a child can be, even if their mother undergoes a terribly harsh and abusive pregnancy, and she's really damaged, and the child is born then himself deprived. Nevertheless, we find that each of the brain growth spurts that take place at birth, age 1, 4, and 7, and the huge shift that takes place at 11, if in that period of time he's given love and attention and nurturing, what will happen with those growth spurts? Nature will have a chance to repair and move on up for the higher evolutionary levels, and that child will be brought around. But if the initial damage is simply added to continually, you cannot expect any other response from them than we're getting.
So we're really chasing our tails when we think we're going to educate them and change them when they've already come to us and our school's damaged from birth.
That's it. I've been, of course, hollering this for years and years, that we're blaming everything about the breakdown of education, and no one is looking at the fact that we're dealing with damaged goods because it's politically incorrect to talk about it. But we can't hide behind this political correctness any longer. We've got to, if the shoe wears it, if the shoe fits, we've got to wear it. And this is just the issue. I think it's so exciting because now we can drop all this name calling and finger pointing and talking about guilt and so on and so forth and say, wait a minute, we cannot do to these young people what we are doing and have any other kind of result. And so it would be far less expensive to do the right thing from the very beginning, as the nation of Sweden does. They pay their mothers and fathers to stay home with the child in the critical first year of life. Both mother and father, they pay the mother for the first 3 years to stay home because they know in the first 4 years of life the entire response pattern of the world is pretty well established. And it has saved them so much money from all the prisons they don't have to build and all the policemen they don't have to have and so on. It has saved them so much money they can afford to pay every mother to stay home with their child.
You are listening to WAAT 750 AM on your radio dial. This is Children Come First with Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and we are listening today with Joseph Chilton Pearce, author of Magical Child Matures, Evolution Zen, lecturer, traveler, world traveler, and expert on child development and the latest brain-mind research. Joe, will you talk to us a little bit about some of the people who are doing this research?
Well, I don't know. This article that came out in Science, the journal Science, about the effect of emotional environment on the fetus and the embryonic brain, that's very recent. I can't give you the office of the research itself, but it's right there. It's within the past 12 months, so it's right there in the literature. The other work has been done by the Swedish Pediatrics Group. An enormous amount of this work has been done by the Israeli medical group, who have been working on the issue of bonding, early child development, and so on. To a great extent, we have all the work of Marshall Klaus and John Cannell. They're decades of work at Case Western Reserve University Hospital. The work of Michel Audant in France, who's I think one of his most famous work is Primal Health, in which he's talking about the emotional nurturing of the child in utero and the first 3 or 4 years determines the health of the individual for the rest of their life. This is information, of course, that came out of Harvard in their very famous study following the health of 200 of their male students 40 years ago. And they found that those who were loved and nurtured in early childhood had far better, I think the ratio is 4 to 1, far better health than those who were not nurtured in childhood. And Rusick from Harvard and Schwartz from the University of Arizona's medical school got together, and they found that this early nurturing determined not only the health of the individual for the rest of their life, but a whole raft of other factors, such as whether the individual at 60 and so on, that they tested 40 years ago, was capable of undergoing an emotion of love or care or empathy. In other words, they found that the lack of nurturing, even though these individuals were normal and had degrees and were carrying on a profession, that they were seriously deprived emotionally and could not take part in emotional interaction with another person. They were incapable of loving and could not be loved in turn. And so you will find that the lots and lots of people who are in on this research of the first 4 years particularly being so critically important.
How about the connection of the heart-mind?
Well, that gets into the whole core of it, of course, is the discovery that the heart itself has a whole neural structure and is in constant communication with the limbic structure of the brain. This is the very famous work started 40 years ago at the National Institute of Health and has been rigorously ignored because it brings in a whole issue that even academic, hardcore scientific people don't like. The fact that the heart is a major source of intelligence in the human being and is the whole source of what we call emotional intelligence. And when we have heartbreak and so on, it's very real. When we say our heart pains, it's very real indeed. The organ of the heart is about 60 to 65% neural structure, exactly the same you find in the brain. And they refer now to neurocardiology, the heart the brain in the heart. And this is the newest medical field. And the discovery that the heart is the major source of intelligence in the human being, maintaining proper relationship, not just of the body, but of our body and other bodies out there in the world. The heart as the major source of relationship with our whole life has been taken out of the realm of poetry and sentiment and lifted into the actuality of biology. The Institute of Heart Math in California is a brain research center that's been doing a very rigorous and robust and excellent work on this connection between the brain and the heart. And so you find that the persons who are nurtured in their early infancy and loved and breastfed and held and played with and all of that have very strong hearts. You will find in every case where they are deprived, you have heart trouble later on. Just like the Israeli medical group found that in every case when the country starts eliminating breastfeeding, as we did 70 or 80 years ago, there is an immediate corresponding increase of breast cancer. A direct one-for-one correlation between the elimination of breastfeeding and the development of breast cancer. Recently, the Swedish medical group again found that breast milk in the mother produces a particular type of protein which literally destroys cancer. And this is some of the most exciting cancer research that's ever been done. They have been working on this for 8 years, and they now know it is a fact. And if they can synthesize this protein, which the breast milk forms, that actually kills cancer cells, they can, because they've extracted it and kill cancer cells automatically, but that's pretty hard to just extract it from breast milk, and they synthesize it. And once they do, you're going to see a real bombshell in the world on cancer cure.
Because mothers who don't nurse their children are prone to cancer?
Well, both they and then their child is, of course, then.
Ah.
But here again, you have this business of the fact that it's not just the milk. It's the nurturing, the close contact with the mother's heart, and all of the what we call emotional factors that go along as well. So that all of these things are interwoven. And we find that if we follow the natural instincts of our own heart and go ahead and love and nurture and care for the infants we should, you'll have a completely different ball game than if we go against that and separate and daycare and all of these things that are happening right now.
My goodness, it sounds like we are really off the beaten track here in terms of, especially in America.
Well, but nevertheless, the research is coming in. That's what makes it exciting, and I think we should be very optimistic, because heretofore all we've had is kind of, well, I feel you should do this. Now we know. Now we have good, hardcore, biological, medical research which backs it all up. All we need to do is get that research out to the public.
Which is what you're doing, which is really
Well, that's
terrific.
what I try to do. And I just simply am kind of a reporter. I'm leaving tomorrow for Colorado to to speak along just these lines.
Well, I have to tell people that knowing you, Joe is not only proficient in his knowledge in brain-mind development and the stages of development, but he's also a model. He practices what he preaches in terms of his own children, and I know a few of his children, and they are certainly reflections of what he is talking about and how it works. And many other people, like Michael Mendiza, the movie producer, who also has followed Joe's work over the years and has raised his children in the same way. And Joe knows what he's talking about here. He's absolutely astute on what's happening in the world in terms of the brain-mind research. Joe, in the last 5 minutes of our program here, would you like to sum up and tell our audience, give them a direction in which to go now that we've had all this information?
Well, obviously, the first thing to do is to give your child serious emotional security. That is, simply love them. You can't give them something that you don't have, though. I think that's why the Institute of Heart Math is extremely valuable, because through all their biological research and their mind-brain research, they have developed very specific and extremely powerful tools for bringing the heart and the brain back into the proper balance they should have been, which has been for so many of us literally disrupted. I mean, compromised severely, that relationship between the brain and the heart through bad pregnancies, bad childbirth, not breastfeeding, bad childhoods, people who feel that their parents didn't love them, and so on. They have a deficiency in the connection between their brain and their heart. And as a result, they feel lonesome, they feel isolated, alienated, and so on. The Institute of Heart Math has very profound, extremely profound ways by which the heart and the brain can be brought back into their natural rhythm, their natural resonance. And it can make a tremendous difference in a person's life. So I would just heartily recommend that an individual look into what the Institute of Heart Math has done. They have a new book. It just came out with Harper, San Francisco, and it's called The Heart Math Solution. And that's Heart Math, M-A-T-H, Solution. And it's a magnificent work which will explain everything they're doing.
By Doc Lou Childer.
And it's Doc Lou Childer, and it's got a co-author there, too. But at any rate, the answers are here. I mean, this is an exciting age in which real, genuine research is coming up, which takes a lot of these the questions out and gives some real answers in their place. So we don't have to fumble around in the dark. And so if a person has that feeling of being cut off from their heart, isolated, alienated, isolated from your children, at war with your children, the Institute of Heart Math has a marvelous way of handling that. And they should read that book and get in touch with the Institute. The other thing is you're now going to get into we didn't even get into it, the most critical part of life, beside early childhood, is adolescence. And there, again, more than any other time, those young people, even as they begin to rebel and do all that, they need love and nurturing and care more than any other time except at birth. And that's, I think, the next most important thing we're discovering, is the profound change that takes place in them and why at that point they're almost as vulnerable as a newborn child.
I would also suggest that people start off by reading your first book, Magical Child, and that's an incredible book in terms of explaining research, not necessarily the latest, but most research that talks about all the developmental stages you've been talking about here today. Magical Child and Magical Child Mature both deal with those issues. And then Evolution's End would be the third book in the series.
I'll tell you, another great work is The Continuum Concept by Gene Leidloff. Now,
the Continuum Concept?
The Continuum Concept.
By who?
Gene Leidloff. Leidloff. It's published by Addison Wesley Press. It first came out in 1976. It's been published all over the world, and it's one of the great works on children that'll ever be done. In fact, if I had my choice, I'd have them buy that over mine. Now, what greater what greater testimonial do you need?
Not very
So
much.
the continuum concept is another profound work for any parent to read.
And that's on Brain-Mind Research, is that it?
No, it's on the her actual experience with bringing up children. And this was the experience in South America, which completely changed her whole life. And you just have to read the continuums concept to see what I'm talking about.
I haven't read that one yet. We are speaking here with Joseph Chilton Pearce, author of Magical Child Matures, Evolution's End, 6 books in total, translated in 40 different languages. He's done presentations in 2,500 programs or more across the world. He's lectured at colleges and universities like Harvard and Rutgers and Columbia and U of Mass, and been in Bangkok and Thailand and New Zealand and India, Japan, Belgium, Germany. He's spoken for organizations like UNICEF, the World Health Organizations, and many others. He's on the advisory board of the Institute of Heart Math and on Brain-Mind Research. And Joe, thank you for being with us today. We greatly appreciate your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me talk about my favorite subject.
You've been listening to Children Come First with Dr. Darya Brzezinski on WAAT Radio, 7:50 a.m. on your radio dial with our guest, Joseph Chilton Pearce. And you can hear Children Come First every Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. on WAAT Radio with interesting guests like Joe, who talks about, today we've had interesting conversation on brain-mind development and child development and how it really happens. The show is produced by Earth Heart Foundation, a nonprofit organization with offices in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and New Mexico. And you can contact us at any time if you'd like to hear information about Joe or anyone else that you hear on our program. Our number is 570-639-2931. That's 570-639-2931. Or you can email us at prokidsrlc.net. That's prokids, PROKIDS, at rlc.net. Join us again next Tuesday at 10 a.m. on WAAT Radio for Children Come First. This is Dr. Darya Brzezinski. Have a great day and have a great week. We'll talk to you again next week.